Today's daf we're going to be learning is Makkot Daf Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Samuel Burlad in honor of Esther Sarah Batsara to get good passing grades in her exams and Parnasat Tova, also in loving memory of Devorah Bat Abraham and for the Refuah Shlema of Shmuel Lev Ben Bracha. Today's daf is sponsored by Audrey and Jake Levant in honor of Deborah and Michael Dixon, wishing you a huge mazel tov in the engagement of Dahlia to Yared Poznansky. Mazel tov. Okay, we're going to get started with the bottom of our daf. We ended with this Rabbi Akiva who said that, remember we had a Braita with these four exceptions to the rule for Eidim Zomimim. And then Rabbi Akiva added that another thing you should know about an Eid Zomim is an Eid Zomim doesn't pay al Yidatz, Eno Meshalem al Piatzmo, which means if an Eid Zomim comes and admits in court that the Eid Zomim lied, right? In other words, they kind of the way some of the commentaries explain it, what does it mean to be an Eid Zomim al Piatzmo? So they say in a kind of weird kind of way, you came to court and said, well, I was with, you couldn't have been there because I was there. I was somewhere else at that time, and somehow you use the terminology of Bazin. It's a little bit strange, but okay. But basically, you're not going to pay if you admit because why? Because Eid Zomein payment is a knas. How do we know Eid Zomein payment is a knas? And again, a knas is when you're not compensating somebody for a loss. That's mammon, like you caused damage, you pay. This is something that's not like that. How do we know? Well, Rabba and Rav Nachman are going to both explain bottom of bet and with bet. I'm a Rabba Teda Sharei Lo Asu Maaseh V'Neragim U'Mishamim. They didn't actually do anything to the other person, and yet they still either get paid, or either get killed, or really what's important here is they have to pay. Meaning, right, we came to court, tried to say that somebody owed $100. In the end, they didn't pay the $100, right? And we still have to pay $100. That shows it's a knas and not that we're compensating because the person never lost the money. It was all on paper, as we say. It wasn't even really on paper. It was just potential, right? Potentially they might have had to pay, but then we got convicted. So that wouldn't be the case. So that would explain that it's knas and not mammon. Rav Nachman Teda Sharei Mammon b'Yabalim u'Mishamim. This really is one and the same. It sounds like it, but right now it sounds from the Gemara like it's saying something different. Rav Nachman said, "I'll prove it to you because in the end, the $100 is still in the hands of the person." And yet, the Eidim Zomimim have to pay, right? The one who they tried to convict. The person still has the money in his hands, and yet they still have to pay. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ini udelo asumase hainu de Rabba." That Rabba and Rav Nachman are saying one and the same thing. So what's Rav Nachman adding to what Rabba said? So the Gemara says, yeah, actually, read it differently. Ema v'chena Rav Nachman. They're both ones that saying one and the same. It shouldn't say Rav Nachman said. It should say, and also Rav Nachman said. Okay, if you add that word v'chen, and also, then it's clear that they're both saying the same thing. They're just saying it in different words or from a different perspective, but it all means the same thing. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Okay, just going to preface today because we're going to have a lot of statements from Rav Yehuda, both in the name of Rav and the name of Shmuel. So if we just zoom out for a minute, Rav Yehuda was second generation Amora, who was both a student of Rav until Rav died. Then he became a student of Shmuel, and those were the two big Amoraim in the generation switching from Tanaim to Amoraim. And he is quoted many, many times in Shas, quoting Rav or Shmuel. So today we're going to see a number of quotes of him by Rav and even one by Shmuel. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. And he's going to make a statement that the Gemara is not going to understand, and they're going to have to go through 5 possibilities until finally on the 5th one they're going to get and understand what he said. Again, this is a good example of Rav Yehuda said something in the name of Rav. Nobody really knows what he said, but by process of elimination, they're going to assume that they figured out what he said. Whether or not that was what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, we don't really know, but the Gemara seems to say this is really the only option. And you'll see the method they go about rejecting every possibility. So what did he say after all that intro? Eid Zomem Meshalem Lefi Chalko. In Eid Zomem pays his portion. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the simple would be, my Meshalem Lefi Chalko, Ilema. If you want to say, which you're always going to reject when you say an Ilema, if you're going to say the Hai Mishalim Palga, by the way, Ilema is a way of basically proving something through process of elimination. We're going to say, if you say this, it can't be that. If you say this, it can't be that. If you say it right, and then you're left with one possibility only. So if you're going to say the Hai Mishalim Palga, what it means is, okay, 2 of us tried to get someone to pay $100. We said this person owes $100. But in the end, we were conspiring witnesses. We each pay 50, okay? Even though theoretically, the punishment is I should get what I tried to do to somebody else, and I tried to get this person to pay $100, I should have to pay 100. But since we're two witnesses, we divide it between us. If we were three, we divided it in three. So why can't it be that? In fact, that is true halachically, but it just can't be that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Why? Because Tanina, well, we're going to see on Daf Hey that mishalshim b'mamon ve'em mishalshim b'malkot. When it comes to lashes, we don't divide the lashes between the two and say each one gets, right, the 40 lashes, which is really 39, divided by 2. Okay, we don't say that, and not because 39 is not divisible by 2, but we don't say that for other reasons, which you'll have to wait till Daf Hey to hear. But mishalshim b'mamon, if it's money they try to obligate, then yes, they split it 50-50, because in the end, they really just have to compensate the person. Again, it's not compensated for the money they lost, they caused the person to lose, but it's compensated for the money they tried to get the person to lose, and they can divide that between the two of them. So if you want, now, okay, so why isn't that what Rav Yehuda is saying in the name of Rav? Because Rav Yehuda would never make a statement and say, oh, Rav said this when the Mishna says it, okay? Or Rav would never have said it in the first place if the Mishna said it. He might have taught the Mishna, but he would then quote it from the Mishna. There's no point for an Amora to say a halacha as if I'm saying it myself when the Mishna already said it. Ella, option 2. What if we came together to court and then a dean came and said, we were with Michelle, but they didn't say we were with you also. They just said they were with me. And they turned me into an Eid Zomein. Now, obviously, our testimony is not accepted anymore, even your part. But you certainly don't have to pay because you weren't proven to be a conspiring witness. So even though your testimony is thrown out, you don't actually have to pay. So perhaps in that case, I would have to pay my half. And that's what Rav Yehuda was saying. So I have to pay the $50. But this is a problem based on a Tannaitic source also, but not like last time. This is a problem because this Tannaitic source contradicts what we just suggested. Umi Mishalim, would I really have to pay the $50? No. The Hatanya doesn't say in a Braita, Ein Eid Zomei Mishalem Mamon Ad She'azimu Shnehem. I don't have to pay money until both of us become Eidim Zomimi, meaning unless they said Imanu Ayitem, we were with you, or theoretically, two witnesses could come and say we were with Michelle, and two witnesses could come and say we were with you. You know, a different time, right? A different place at the same time. And then if they knock out both of us, even if it's two different groups, then we would both have to pay. But in general, we say not payment, not death penalty, not lashes. All of that is only what will happen is, again, the testimony will be thrown out of court, but neither of us will get punished, so that can't be what they're saying. So Amarava, third option. Okay, the first two options were basically the Gemara is saying, it can't be this, it can't be that. So now comes Rava with an answer. The problem is Rava's answer is going to need a little tweaking, and it's going to take us a few times till we get it right. Amarava be'omer edut sheker he'adati. Now we understand why we got here, because what were we talking about? We started with Rabbi Akiva, who talked about admission, if you confess. So now we're going to have a case where I came to court after I testified with you in court. I come to court and I say, I lied. I confess that I lied. Then that could be what we can say. I then have to pay my share because I confessed. But what's the problem with that? Kol kamine, kevan shehigid shuveino chozer magid. But wait, that can't possibly be true. Because we have a principle, and it says in Mishna or Braita this time, but we do have a principle that's known, that once somebody says something in court and testifies, they can't come and testify anything else against it. Meaning we always accept the first thing I said. So if I come to court and say, this person owes money, and then I come to court and I say, I lied, this person doesn't owe the money, we don't believe me. Now, why is that? Okay, the basic reason to explain this is if you think about it, let's say I could testify in court that somebody murdered someone, okay? Let's take an extreme case. And then that person sends people to threaten me that night, right? And I get death threats and I get all sorts of things and I'm scared. And they say, if you don't change your testimony, right, I'll kill you or something like that. So I go to court the next day and I say, oh, that person didn't kill. So we don't allow that because of that reason, because it could be that I'm just being threatened. So therefore, I can't say, oh, I lied and then be convicted based on that. Okay, so that doesn't work. Ela be'omer he'adnu v'uzamnu, option 4. If you say, he'adnu v'uzamnu bebeitim ploni, I come to court and I say, listen, I was in a different court. I testified. They they turned me into a conspiring witnesses. Okay, me and the other person. We both became conspiring witnesses. And I admit that in a different court. Now here, I'm not admitting that I lied in court. What I'm admitting is that I was convicted in a different court, and that's a different story. That's not taking away my testimony. That's just saying, right, because first of all, I'm not trying to undo my testimony. No one's dealing with that case in this court. I'm just saying that I was convicted in a different court. So now we're going to connect to Rabbi Akiva. Remember what Rabbi Akiva said? If I admit that I owe money, I don't have to pay because it's knas, and I don't have to pay knas based on my admission. Now, we were trying to use this to explain that what did Rav Yehuda say when he said in the name of Rav that I would have to pay my half? It sounds like I would have to pay. Now, if we say that, kiman delo Rabbi Akiva, they're going to say this sounds like then the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav goes against Rabbi Akiva. Now, it's just because Rabbi Akiva said it. Remember, he disagreed with the Bright had four things, and he said, "Oh, I add a fifth," which means not necessarily does everyone agree with him. So, but they don't like, this is a difficulty because they don't like that Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav wouldn't go like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is a pretty mainstream opinion in general. Many of the students of Rabbi Akiva were major rabbis, and it wouldn't make sense that Rav would make a statement against Rabbi Akiva. So they're saying, right, Deloka Rabbi Akiva, Dika Rabbi Akiva, if you say it's like Rabbi Akiva, Amarin, Afeno Mishalem al Piatzmo. Rabbi Akiva says this is a knas payment. You wouldn't have to do it. You wouldn't have to pay it if you admitted in court. So admitting that I was convicted on a charge in a court, a different court, I wouldn't actually have to pay. So then, again, now what's the issue? I just want to remind you. Mishalem al Piatzmo means I have to pay my half, but the other witness doesn't. Obviously, why? Because it's based on my admission. I can't convict the other witness. I'm only one person, right? I can't, you need two witnesses to convict the other person. But myself, I could theoretically convict, but not according to Rabbi Akiva here because it's knas. And that's why this sugya is here, because it relates to Rabbi Akiva directly. Option number 5, Ella, and this is the final one, and we're now going to tweak this just a little bit. Be'omel, I come to court and I say, Hey, anuvu zamnu bebeitin ploni, which is the same as before. V'chuyavnu mamon. Not only was I convicted in the court, but they obligated me to pay money. Now, once the court issues a document or something that says I owe money, this knas payment turns into a mamon payment, and now I have a financial obligation no matter what. And if I admit it, I actually will have to pay. So that changes it from knas to mamon, and then that fits. And now the question is, why did Rav Yehuda have to tell us this? It's kind of obvious. Well, you might have thought that since you don't have to pay because I can't convict the other witness, but in this way, my confession is not going to make that other witness be obligated to pay. Just like we learned before, I don't have to pay until both become edim zomimi. Maybe I don't have to pay until both of us actually have to pay. And the point is, no. Since I was convicted already and I was actually obligated to pay money, it becomes a mamon payment. If I admit it in court, I actually have to pay my half. And that's the chidush of Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. That took a long time to figure out, but now we figured it out. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we're going to go to two interesting Mishnayot to talk about cases where the witness is obligated someone to pay something that theoretically they might have anyway had to pay later. So how do we assess Shiur Zaman? It becomes complicated. So you'll see in a minute as soon as we discuss the first case. Midim anu et ish ploni shegeresh et ishto velo natan la ketubata. They testify about a person that he divorced his wife, and it's not true, he didn't, okay? He divorced his wife and now has to pay her the ketuba money, and he didn't yet pay her. They say, number 1, you divorced her. Number 2, you haven't paid her the money. So they want to make him pay the ketuba money. Now, let's go back and remember what ketuba money is. If she was a virgin when they got married, it's 200 zuz. There's often a tosefet, he adds something. Then there's the nichseit son barzel, that's the property that she brings in from home, that he says, I will take responsibility and return them to you at the value they are today, the day of the marriage. And then that's basically a monetary obligation because if they went up in value or down in value, he just owes the amount that they were worth at the time of the marriage. And all throughout the marriage, he can enjoy the benefits from that land. Anything that's nichsei melog, which is a different kind, usufruct property, she brings in from an inheritance or something like that, she gets to take out as is, okay? And that's also promised in the ketuba that right during the time of the marriage, he gets to use it. When it goes back to her, right, when he dies or divorces her, if he predeceases her, or he divorces her, she gets all that back. Okay, so she'll get the nichsei melog as is. She'll get the nichsei son barzel valued at what they were at the time of the wedding. It means if they went down in value, I'll have to give her extra money. If they went up in value, he could just give her the value of they were at the time of the marriage, more like a monetary obligation, and all the other stuff. So if he dies first, she'll get all that stuff. If she dies first, then he inherits her property. Okay? So the Dichsei Malog, Son Barzel, he'll inherit that stuff. Okay, so um, now the question is, since they said you owe the ketuba money right now, okay? Now, it's not exactly true, but it's very possible that tomorrow, the day after, we don't know when, but at some future point, he anyway would have had to pay that money. So how do we assess? We can't say they tried to make him pay. Let's just say the ketuba was worth 1,000 zuz with all those things. We can't make him pay 1,000 zuz, the adim. We can't make the witnesses pay 1,000 zuz. It's not like they caused a loss of 1,000 zuz. If he had paid this money today, but anyway, he might have had to pay it later. So how do we assess? But we don't know. He might not have had to pay it. Okay, so it's really a complicated case. עומדים כמה אדם רוצה ליתן בכתובתה של זו, שנתערם לו ונתגרשה ומתה ירשנה בעלה. They assess. How much is this ketubah worth in the shuk? Meaning, if we sold this right now. Okay, now here we're going to see. Okay, I'll already go to the Gemara because it's hard to explain otherwise. Ketzad shamim, how do we evaluate? Amar Rav Chisda beBaal. Rav Nachman Roshai Amar beIsha. Let's explain. Each of them could sell their part. Okay, let's say the woman's desperate for money, or the man is desperate for money. They can each sell their rights of the ketubah to someone else. Now, whoever's going to buy it, it's a bit of a risk, right? Maybe they'll get money, maybe they won't. So the question is, how much is that worth in the marketplace? So let's say the husband sells his share. Now, the husband's share is worth more. Why? Because first of all, the property is in his possession right now, and he can enjoy the benefits of her property. So if somebody buys the rights from the husband, they actually get to enjoy the benefits from the property right now, all the proceeds. Number two, if she dies first, the property is already in his hands, which makes it super easy. He doesn't have to go collecting it. So that's actually worth more. So probably let's put it around 600 zuz because it might end up zero, right? It'll never end up zero really because they will get proceeds and the proceeds from the land in the meantime. But let's say, the husband dies the next day, okay? They'll really end up with almost nothing. So it's a bit of a risk, but the payback is not too bad. Now, the woman's share is worth a little less because, number one, okay, the husband might not die or might not divorce her, so they'll get nothing. And there's no payroll or anything to get in the meantime. She really has no rights right now that he can buy. And number two, once the husband does die or divorce, then the person who inherits the wife's part is going to have to go collect it in court and try to claim their rights to it, right? The property is in the hands of the husband. So they have to remove it from the hands of the husband. Whereas if you buy the husband's share, you get it right away, and then you don't have to worry about collecting it later. So there's certain benefits to getting the husband's share, certain to getting the wife. The wife's is worth less. Let's put it at 400. Okay? Now, so now the question is, the question is we evaluate its worth in the marketplace, but its worth in the marketplace can be different if it's the man, different if it's the woman. So which one is it? So again, let's go back to the Gemara. So Rav Chisda says we go by the husband's portion, meaning if the husband, this is the simplest way to explain it, the husband today could have sold his share of the ketuba for 600 zuz. Instead, right, the Edim Zomimim said you owe 1,000 zuz. So basically, what's the loss? The loss is what the husband could have gotten today by them saying you have to pay the whole ketuba today and put out 1,000 zuz. They're basically causing him a loss of what it's worth now today in the shuk, what he could have sold it for today. Because we don't know what it'll be worth down the road, right? But today he could have sold it for 600 zuz. So their loss they caused him was 600 zuz. It's marketplace value today for the husband. That's Rav Chisda. Rav Natan bar Oshaya says, B'isha. No, we evaluate, when the Mishna said we evaluate how much it's worth as a shuk, we meant for the woman to sell her portion. Now, if the woman were to sell, she would sell it for 400. Now it's a little more complicated, okay? He could pay, what does this have to do with the husband? It's not causing a loss to the husband. Well, the husband theoretically could buy out the wife today. If the husband wanted to, he could spend 400 shekel and be done with the ketuba. He could say, I'm buying you out. And since she could sell it in the shuk for 400 zuz, he could buy it for 400 zuz. So now, what loss are they causing the husband? Well, now this is different. This isn't what he could have sold it for. This is what he could have bought it for. So this time we have to deduct. It's the deduction of what he could have bought her out for. It has to be deducted from what they tried to make him pay, which ends up 600. The numbers I use, it ends up the same amount, but we got to it differently because his portion, right, if it was his sale, it would be what it's valued at him now, right? Here we're evaluating what he could have bought her out for, and therefore we have to do the deduction, okay? And there we would deduct it. Amar Papa biisha ubiktubata. Now he says one minor point, which is when we evaluate what the ketuba is worth and what the woman could sell it for in the shuk, we're not including the nichsei malog. Why is that? Because the nichsei malog, I always think of them to make it easy to remember, is like an heirloom, right? An heirloom you're going to get back exactly as it is. Now we don't. That's a value that all the other values in the ketuba are set values. So the edim zamimim could say, "Hey, we had no idea about the malog. Like we don't know what the malog are worth because it's not a set amount in the ketuba. It's whatever they're worth on the day of whatever." So on the day of death, divorce, we weren't even thinking about the nichsei malog because we have no idea what they're evaluated at. When we said he owes the ketuba, we meant the stuff we know he owes. So they could that number is an irrelevant number for this chishuv according to Rav Papa. Okay, new Mishnah. Okay, so say you claims this guy owes 1,000 zuz. Basically, we're going to say the witnesses came and said you owe money and you owe it in 30 days from now. You took out a loan and you owe the money, a loan of 1,000 zuz, and you owe it from now to the you have to pay it back in 30 days. And you say, what do you mean? No, I owe the money. It's true I took a loan out, but I took out a 10-year loan, not a 30-day loan. And the edim again becomes omimim. Obviously, that's what we're talking about. Two witnesses come and said, there's no way you can know about that loan because you were with us, blah, 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 blah. And so what do? Because in the end, you admit that you have to pay the money. So they didn't really make you lose 1,000 zuz, but they did make you pay it. They would have made you pay it within 30 days rather than within 10 years. So omdim kama damrot tzadikim v'yu biyado 1,000 zuz. Ben onam b'kam ba'ad 30 yom, ben onam b'kam ba'ad 10 shanim. We evaluate how much is it worth to you to be able to pay the money back 10 years later. Right? That's worth something to you. So that's the value that we basically make the edim somimim pay. How much someone would be willing to pay to push off a loan for 10 years. Now we're going to start getting into something else. And we're going to bring a statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Hamavet chavero le'eser shanim shvi'i meshamatito. Okay, we're going to start outside and then we're going to connect it to our Mishna. If I lend you money for 10 years, and then obviously within those 10 years, the Shemitah year is going to come at some point. Okay, let's just say in year 7. Let's say it was the beginning of the Shemitah cycle. The Shemitah year comes. What happens in the Shemitah year? All loans are canceled. So if I loaned you money for 10 years, Shemitah comes and cancels that loan. Turning now to Amud Bet. The afagav hashalo krina be'lo yigos, and even though it says in the Torah lo yigos, meaning you can't, right? What happens in the Shemitah year is it tells you cannot collect the loan. Now, in the Shemitah year, the loan didn't yet come up for collection, right? Because it's only year 7, and you have till year 10 to return it, and therefore the lo yigos is not really relevant yet because lo yigos means don't collect it in the Shemitah year, but the collection isn't happening in the Shemitah year, so it means hashalo karina be. You can't say the pasuk lo yigos applies. But self atili de lo yigos. But since the Shemitah year came in the middle, and eventually you will then collect that loan, since the Shemitah year passed, and even though lo yigos doesn't, right, you're not trying to collect it in the Shemitah year, still the Shemitah year overrides this loan. And there's no loan. Okay? So if I lent you money for 10 years, you actually don't have to pay it back. Mativ Rav Kahana says, well, then this Mishnah makes no sense because Omdim kama damrot tzadikim v'yu biyado 1,000 zuz ben litem mikam ba'ad 30 yom ben litem mikam ba'ad 10 shanim. Now, right, that's the Mishnah. Now, iyamar shvi'i meshamatito. If you say the Shemitah year cancels the loan, kulunami ba'ay shalom elei, then this loan theoretically could have never been collected, which means that if they tried to say you owe 1,000 zuz, they tried to obligate you 1,000 zuz because you wouldn't have had to pay anything because by the time the loan comes up in 10 years, Shemitah year is going to come in and cancel your loan. So Rav Kahana, and this is going to be our theme, Rav Yehuda is going to say something this time in the name of Shmuel, later in the name of Rav. Rav Kahana is going to raise objection. So Rav Kahana says, this makes no sense in light of the Mishnah. Comes Rava and says, I'm a Rava, I'll explain it to you. Hacha b'mayaskina, what's the case in our Mishnah? B'malva alamashkon u'b'moser shtaratav lebeitin. Our Mishnah is talking about a case, I'll just say it outside before I explain what these two cases are, where there is no Shemitah Ksafim. There are certain cases, and we're going to read it right now, Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Hamavel amashkon v'moser shtaratav lebeitin ema shmitin. The Shemitah year, there's a Mishnah in Shvi'it, which is all about Shemitah. The Shemitah year does not cancel loans in the following two cases. If, when I lent you the money, you gave me collateral, then it's as if the loan was already collected. And there's no issue of lo yigos. Lo yigos means don't collect it, right? But it's as if it's already collected, because if you don't give me the money, I'll just keep your collateral. So that makes it a loan that's as if it's already collected, which means the laws of Shemitah Ksafim, of cancellation of loans or nullifications of loans, doesn't come into play. That's one option. The second is moser shtaratav lebeitin. If I, as the malva, and this is what our prusbol is based on, I give it to the beitin, and I say, you're in charge of collecting the loan. Lo yigos is, I, as a private individual, can't collect, but the beitin can collect loans. So therefore, if I give my shtarot to the beitin and basically appoint them to be responsible for collecting my loans, then my loan isn't canceled. So what Rava does is, he says, obviously, since this Mishnah seems to be very clear that this loan isn't canceled by the Shemitah year, it must be, it's one of those two cases, our Mishnah. And that resolves the difficulty of Rav Kahana. But now we're going to have a different version of the whole sugya. Okay, so we're going to start from the beginning with Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, but in a different version. Ika da Amre, Amar, and it's going to be the opposite. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Hamavet chavero le'eser shanim ein shvi mishamatito, which is kind of what we would have thought intuitively, right? Why would I ever lend you money for 10 years knowing that the loan's going to be canceled? So this version says that actually, Shmuel said that if I lend you money for 10 years, Shvi doesn't cancel it. Why? Now we're going to say the exact opposite as we said before, even though ultimately, right, even though ultimately I will collect that loan, and maybe, the issue of lo yigos, don't collect, will come into play after the Shemitah year is over. But hashtami lo krina be lo yigos. But when the Shemitah year comes, there is no lo yigos. I'm not trying to collect a loan on the Shemitah year. So therefore, it's not canceled. And then, instead of Rav Kahana bringing a difficulty from our Mishnah, in this version, Rav Kahana is going to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Oh, I'm a Rav Kahana, afana nami tanina. I can prove that from the Mishnah. Omdim kama damar tzeli via elevzus biado, ben litem kavad shalshim, ben litem kavad eser shanim. Right? Again, the witnesses conspiring witnesses don't pay 1,000, because anyway, the person was going to have to pay 1,000. So we assess how much someone's willing to get the extension on the loan. And if you say the Shemitah year cancels the loan, kulunami by shlumile, they should have to pay him the full 1,000 zuz. I'm a Rava, and now instead of Rava resolving the problem that Rav Kahana raised to Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, in this case, Rav Yehuda made this statement in the name of Shmuel, came Rav Kahana and supported it with the Mishnah. Rava is now going to reject the support from Rav Kahana. Rava hacha b'mayaskina b'mavel l'mishkana b'moser shartav lebeitin ditnan b'mavel l'mishkana b'moser shartav lebeitin emash mitin. Rava says, no, you could very easily explain the Mishnah that it wasn't talking about that case, and the Mishnah was talking about a case where there is no Shemitah Ksafim because it overrides. Either it was given with collateral or it was given to the beitin, and therefore the Mishnah doesn't prove anything. And that's the end of the second version of the sugya. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, another statement of Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, also having to do with cancellations of loans. Haomer lechavero, al menat shelo tishmeteni shvi'it meshametet. If somebody says, I'm lending you money on the condition, let's say I'm lending you money to be paid back in the Shemitah year or after the Shemitah year, under the condition that the Shemitah year will not cancel the loan. And I'm basically saying, I'm only going to lend you the money, if you agree to this condition. I don't want to lend you the money otherwise, because then I won't ever get my money back. Well, shvi'it meshametet anyway, okay? It's going to cancel the loan anyway, because why? This is what we call matnel ketuba Torah, right? You can't make a condition against something it says in the Torah. Now, if you remember, we learned about this, particularly in a case where a man says, I'm betrothing this woman on condition that I'm not going to give her the share ksuda onah. Now, onah for sure he has to give her, because that's the commitment to have sexual relations with her. That goes against something it says in the Torah. However, there's a debate about if it related to money. Because money, even though someone's obligated to give money, like the ksut, okay, that means he has to give her money for clothing and support her, okay, that or give her housing and shelter, things like that. That part, there's a debate about whether he can override it or not, because she could theoretically say, I'm willing to give up on the monetary stuff, okay, because the monetary stuff is there to protect her. If she doesn't want it, okay, she could say, I don't want it. When it comes to other things that aren't monetary, for sure not. Monetary, there's a debate. So this is monetary, right? And it basically sounds like Shmuel saying you can't go against anything it says in the Torah, even when it comes to money. Lema chasavar Shmuel. Now, Gemara's going to say, wait a minute. Does this mean that Shmuel holds exactly what we just said, which is now ketuba Torah, right? That this is making a condition against something in the Torah. The kolam anal ketuba Torah to know batel. And anybody who makes a stipulation against something that says in the Torah, this stipulation is canceled, which means the loan is a loan without the condition, meaning Shvi, it's going to cancel that loan. But how could you say Shmuel says that? Because look at this debate, and we learned this in Bava Metzia. Ha'itmar, it was said, Ha'omer l'chavero manat she'en lecha alai ona'ah. If you sell me something and you say, I'm selling this to you under the condition that you don't sue me later for ona'ah and say that I overcharged you for it. So Rav Omer, yesh lo alav ona'ah. Rav says, I can claim ona'ah if I want. Okay? There's two explanations given for Rav. One is because you're going against what it says in the Torah. You're not allowed to overcharge me by more than a sixth. So if you overcharge me by more than a sixth or even a sixth, I can say that sale wasn't valid. Another option is you can say that I misunderstood what you said. I thought that you meant, when you made that stipulation, I'm giving this to you on the condition that there's no ona'ah. I thought you meant that you're promising me that you're not overcharging me. So I agreed to that because I was happy to agree to that. I didn't think you meant that I can't sue you for overcharging later. So that's another possibility as to what Rav says. But Rav doesn't interest us because we want to see the contradiction in Shmuel. What does Shmuel say? Shmuel Omer, ein lo alav ona'ah. Shmuel says this stipulation, right, works, even though it goes against the Torah, because the Torah says you can't overcharge. So there you see that Shmuel thinks if it's money, right, I can say, yeah, I won't sue you for it, okay? I won't claim that you overcharged me. I'm willing. I don't care. I want this so badly. I'm willing to overpay, basically. And Shmuel says, we accept my stipulation. That seems to contradict. Why then, if I say Shemitah is not mishametet, doesn't work, right? That Shemitah won't be canceled. Why wouldn't that work? So here comes the Gemara's answer. Ha'itmar la, but it was said about that machloket Rav and Shmuel, and it was said about Shmuel specifically that it depends on how it's worded, and that's what we're going to say now. Amar Rav Anan, l'didim v'farshalim minei Shmuel. So Rav Anan says Shmuel himself explained to me. Almanat, it depends how you said it. If you say almanat she'en lecha alai ona'ah, ein lo alav ona'ah. If you say under the stipulation that, now notice the wording, ein lecha alai. You say to me that, Michelle, you don't have any claim on me. That works because you can actually do it tonight against ketuba Torah. I can say, because it's money, I'm willing to, say I don't care. But if you say al manat she'ein bo onah, but if you say I'm committing that this sale does not have overcharging in it, and you did overcharge, hare yesh bo. I'm sorry. Al manat she'ein bo onah. 1 second, let me just get it right. Not that this doesn't have ona'ah, hare yesh bo ona'ah. As if you say under the stipulation that this doesn't have ona'ah, not I, if you bring me into the picture, then basically you're saying, right, I agree to your stipulation, I'm agreeing to override. But if you say this doesn't have ona'ah, and it does have ona'ah, then of course that's a t'nai against ketuba Torah. You say this sale I'm not overcharging, and you are overcharging. So of course that's going to be valid. So therefore, how does that apply to us? Hachanami. Al menat shelo tishmiteni bashvi'it. If you say, under the condition that you won't cancel my loan, you won't cancel the loan over the Shemitah year, meaning you're willing to forego that, ain't Shvit Meshama Teto. Then the Shemitah loan isn't, right? Then Shemitah doesn't cancel the loan because I agreed to that. I was willing to say I'm overriding. It was an agreement between you and me about this not coming into effect, just like the ona'ah. And that was the case. Now it said in our text, shvi'it, but he changes it to bishvi'it, that I won't allow, right, that I'll I'll agree to forego the cancellation of the loan in the Shemitah year. But if you say, Amanat shelo tishmeteni shvi'it, but if the subject is the Shemitah year, if you say under the stipulation that the Shemitah won't cancel the loan, that you can't do. That goes against Mashka Torah. Then Shvi'it, Mashama Titov. Of course, Shvi'it will cancel the loan. So it's all about how it's worded according to Shmuel, and that's how we can understand Shmuel's words even in light of this Onah case, or particularly in light of the Onah case. Tana. Now we're going to bring a braita about this, we're just getting into loans now, and this is back to the Mishna about the 30 days and the 10 years. Hamavet chavero stam. Okay, so this is a braita Tana. Hamavet chavero stam ein rasha l'tavo pachot mishloshim yom. If you give me a loan and we didn't stipulate how long the loan was going to be for, or anyone took a loan, we assume the standard is 30 days, which means the creditor can't go collecting the loan less than 30 days. So it's like, if you remember, stam nezirut is 30 days, right? 30 days is like a number they like to throw. Sava Rabba Bar Chana Kamei Rav Lamemer. Now Rabba Bar Chana came in front of Rav and thought to say, which Rav is going to say you're wrong. Hanimile b'milva b'shtar. This is only if it has a document. It was written. Delo avid inish detarach lekatav shtar b'tzir mitlatin yoma. People wouldn't go to the tircha, the bother, to write a document. Remember, in those days, it wasn't so easy. You had to go to a sofer. Not everybody knew how to write. And even nowadays, right, you write a contract. You have to get it checked by a lawyer if you're smart about it, right? And it's a process. You're not going to go through that whole process for less than 30 days, okay? It's not worth it for the creditor, right? For the borrower, sorry, to do this for less than 30 days. But a milva al peh lo. But if it's an oral loan, could be you can go collect the money the next day if you want. Amarli Rav, but Rav said, no, not true. Hachi Amar Chavivi, my uncle, who's Rabbi Yehuda, said, Echad milva b'shtar, echad milva al peh. It doesn't matter. Either way, the standard loan is 30 days, and the creditor can't collect it until 30 days passes. And in fact, Hanyanami Hachi, there's also a braita to support what Rabbi Yehuda said. Hamavet chavero, or Rav claims Rabbi Yehuda said, Hamavet chavero b'stam eno rashai l'tavo pachot mishloshim yom, echad milva b'shtar, echad milva al peh. Okay, whether it was oral, whether it was written, you can't collect until 30 days. Amalei Shmuel Rav Matna. Shmuel now says to Rav Matna, Lo teiti v'karech adam mefarsheli lahashmata. You cannot sit on your feet until you explain to me this, the source for this. Mina hamilta da'amar Rabbanan mavet chavero stami no rashai l'tavo b'chol b'shloshim yom. Shmuel says to Rav Matna, what's the source for this halacha that we just explained? To which he answers, right, and echad b'shtar, echad peh, right, for both these cases. Amarlei dichtiv. Okay, now we're going to quote the pasuk where it says, which relates to this whole thing we've been discussing. You should be careful and not, it's the Shemitah year's coming, and you say, I'm going to be mean and I'm not going to lend money because someone needs money, but I won't get back my loan, so I'm not going to lend the money. And the Torah warns against people doing this. When it says, right, Hishamer lecha pen. That you might do some bad thing. To say, Kirva Shnata Sheva, the 7th year is coming, Shnata Shmita, the Shemitah year. You can already see what the problem with this pasuk is. 7th year is the Shemitah year. Why does it say both? Mimash b'shneimar Kirva Shnata Sheva. Any yodeshi Shnat Shmita, right? If it says Shnata Sheva, I know it's the Shemitah year. What else would it be talking about? Elamatam Lomar Shnata Shmita. Why does it add that? Lomar Lacha Yesh Shmita Acheret Shikazo. It's to teach you. Not only is there the Shemitah year where you can't collect loans, there's another time period where you can't collect loans. Now, it's not the same because Shemitah year cancels your loans, and this is just you can't collect them right now. And what is that? Ezo, hamavet chavero stam, she'eino rashat l'tavo b'chol b'shloshim yom. That Shnat Shemitah, which is definitely a drasha, not a simple reading, is referring to these 30 days where you're not allowed to collect a loan for the first 30 days. And that's the standard, and it's learned from here. Now, it's a little bit weird. Besides, that's not what the pasuk was talking about. Besides that, this is not a cancellation of a loan like it is in Shemitah. It's just a temporary pushing off of the loan, of the collection of the loan. But there's another issue, which is it's 30 days, not a year, right? And as the pasuk says a year, and we're talking about 30 days. So they add to Amar Mar, as someone says, Shloshim yom shana chashuv shana. There are some times where 30 days are counted like a year. Okay, what are we talking about here? Context is Orla. Orla is, okay, this stuff has a lot of extra things we have to learn. Orla is the first 3 years, you can't eat fruits from your tree. But if you planted your tree a month before the end of the year, right, if If you remember the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, where there's different dates that count as the first of the year for certain things. So the early year starts in a certain month. 30 days before that, the tree is there, right? You planted it. Already that counts as a whole year. 30 days could be considered a year. And that helps us with taking this year they're talking about and saying it could be referring to 30 days. Obviously, it's something totally different, but at least they have some sort of reference to the fact that 30 days could be considered a year. Now we have two more statements we're going to see Rav Yehuda saying, both in the name of Rav, that Rav Kahana is going to raise a difficulty with. First one we're going to learn completely. The second one we're only going to start. It's a big sugya that's going to continue into tomorrow's daf. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Hapatech beit savar b'Shabbat chayav chatat. If you open up the neck of a shirt, there's two different interpretations. We'll go with the simple that the shirts, the way they created them. Okay, I'll give you an example. It's Pesach tonight, almost tonight, right? Tonight we start Erev Pesach. Seder night, years ago, we started making these robes for the kids, and we just took, it's a good idea if you haven't done this yet, but we took those tablecloths that are like, actually we took some really old, just like tablecloths we didn't use, and also tablecloths that are those, you buy them, they're like a little better than the Chad Pami ones and the one time, but we cut off like a neck, we cut a circle and they put it on. Okay, so that's the way they used to make their shirts. They would make cloth and then they would cut out the neck. So until you cut the neck, the shirt's not usable at all. Okay, you can't do anything with it. It's not like our shirts where we have a neck and maybe you just widen it or something, but this is just creating the neck. If you do this on Shabbat, you're chayav chatat. Why? So it's because it's makebe patish. It's the last thing that makes it usable. Before this, the shirt isn't usable. Now it's usable. To which matkif la Rav Kahana v'chima ben zelim megufat chavit. Now the barrels they would seal. They would put a cover on them and then seal it shut. Now, why are you allowed to open that on Shabbat? If it's the same thing. Until you open it, it's sealed and you can't use it. By opening it, you make it usable. To which Amar lei ze chibur v'zeino chibur. Because the shirt is all one piece, and then you create the opening. As opposed to the barrel is already open, you put a cover on it, make it hard to, right, impossible to access. But then when you open it, right, there are two different pieces that go together. Okay, this has all sorts of relevances for opening bottles on Shabbat and all that. Or what kind of bottles you can, what kind you can't. It's very, okay, we don't have time for this. And it's also not an issue related to Makkot. It's a Shabbat issue. And we talked about this in Masechet Shabbat. For Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, another thing he said. So again, why is this here? Because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and Rav Kahana had a question on it. Like before, Rav Yehuda said something in the name of Shmuel, Rav Kahana questioned it. Now we have another one about mikvah. Okay, the background you need to know, and I already recorded the next stuff, so I gave a lot of the introductory background next year, so I'll give just a bit because we're at the end of this year. But basically, for a mikvah to be kosher, it needs 40 se'ah of water. And water has to be water from a mayan, natural water, not water collected in a vessel. If it's missing some of the water and it's not up to the minimum amount of 40 se'ah, and you put in 3 log of mayim that was collected in a vessel, okay, if you put 3 log in a mayim that was collected in a vessel in a mikvah that's already kosher, there's no problem. But if you add it to a mikvah that's missing, you ruin the mikvah. But according to Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, if the shlosha lugi mayim shenafal toho kortov shel yayin umareu kemarei yayin v'naflu lemikvah, if you took 3 log of water that has, in addition to the 3 log of water that was collected in a vessel, which passes your mikvah, but you added a little bit of wine, or it had a little bit of wine in it, teeny bit, but it changed the color of it, because that's what happens. If the wine is very strong, it could change the color. And it looks like wine. Now, wine doesn't disqualify a mikvah. It's just irrelevant. I mean, you wouldn't want to put it in your mikvah, but it's not going to disqualify it. So, lo psaluhu, it doesn't disqualify your mikvah. Matkif la Rav Kahana, here comes Rav Kahana's attack. What's the difference between that and colored water? And how do we know what the colored water is a problem? If you have 3 log of colored water, ruins the mikvah. You put food coloring into water, whatever it might be colored from, and you put it in the mikvah, it's a problem. So why is the wine not? It's basically like colored water. To which they answer, Rava answers, Amarle Rava, Hatamaya Ditziva Mikre, Hachachamra Maziga Mikre. A fascinating answer. It's all in the name. Colored water is called colored water. Wine that's diluted is called diluted wine. Okay, when you add a little wine to water, we call that diluted wine, maybe very diluted wine, but it's still called diluted wine, which means it's called wine, which means it doesn't disqualify your mikvah, as opposed to the water, which is colored water, and water disqualifies the mikvah. It's a very interesting answer. Anyway, now the Gemara is going to say, "V'hatani Rabbi Chia who redo it to mikvah." Rabbi Chia Dafka said that these three log with have the wine in it looks like wine actually does disqualify your mikvah, and then we're going to go off on a whole thing about that, how to resolve the contradiction between Rabbi Chia and Rav. Okay, how could Rav say something against Rabbi Chia? And that's what we're going to get to in tomorrow's daf. Okay, Rav says I can read it, but Lokasha ha Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri ha Rabbanan. But until we read by Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and Rabbanan, we're not going to understand, and we'll leave that for tomorrow's class. So, what do we have today? We started with the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav Eitzomei Mishalem Lefi Chalko. First, we finished up the Knas, and then from the Knas, we got into this Mishalem Lefi Chalko, and then we went through 5 options to understanding that until we got to the 5th, right? And in the end, connected back, the 4th one connected back to the Rabbi Akiva statement about Eitzomei being a Knas payment. Then we got to these 2 Mishnayot about the ketuba case or about the paying the loan earlier, and then we had to evaluate what do the Eidim Zomimim have to pay. And then from there, we got into this whole thing about Shemitah Ksafim because, right, we brought 2 different versions of the sugya of what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel that either contradicted the Mishnah or either worked well with the Mishnah. And then we have Rav's statement who either helped resolve it or against Rav Kahana's contradiction or rejected Rav Kahana's proof. Then we got to another statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel about the Matnei Mashkatu Torah about the Shemitah, and then we went into that sugya, and then from there we got to 2 other statements of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav that were contradicted by Rav Kahana, but resolved in the end. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. The Shiurim are up already. Will be up on the site in the next little bit through Monday, okay, including Monday, which for some of you will be second day Chag, so if you have time to learn today while you're cooking, I don't know. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, we'll have regular Zoom classes. Thursday, there's no regular Zoom. Everything will be posted earlier, early in the morning, and it will be up there. All the shiurim are there. It's just the Zoom that it's relevant for. Same thing with Sunday after Chag, okay? So that will also go up already on Friday. Friday, I'll put up Shabbat and Sunday. So again, for those keeping 2 days, you can have 2 days, and for those who aren't, doing 2 days of Chag, so you can listen on Sunday. And that's it for today. Wishing everyone a real Chag Sameach.